According to the book The Development of Mathematics by Eric Temple Bell, legend has it that on the 24th of May 1543, as 70-year-old Copernicus lay still on his deathbed, seized with apoplexy and paralysis, he is presented with the final printed pages of his book De Revolutionibus Orbium Coelestium. He then wakes up from a stroke-induced coma, looks at his book, and then ends his breathing peacefully. His book, however, lives on to become the oldest book to take its place among the greatest scientific volumes to ever have been written. 4 years before his death, when he was still working on his book, although not sure of whether he wants to publish it, in 1539, George Joachim Rheticus, a Wittenberg mathematician, arrives in Fromburg. Philip Melanchthon, a close theological ally of Martin Luther, has arranged for Rheticus to visit several astronomers and to study with them. Rheticus goes on to become Copernicus's pupil, staying with him for 2 years. Under strong pressure from Rheticus, and having seen the favourable first general reception of his work, Copernicus finally agrees to give De Revolutionibus to his close friend Tiedemann-Giese, Bishop of Chelmno, Kulm, to be delivered to Rheticus for printing by the German printer Johannes Petraius at Nuremberg, Germany. While Rheticus initially supervised the printing, he had to leave Nuremberg before it was completed, handing over the task of supervising the rest of the printing to a Lutheran theologian, Andreas Osiander. The book offered an alternative model of the universe to Ptolemy's geocentric system, the model in which Earth was the centre of the universe and everything was to rotate around it. Copernicus proposes that it was, in fact, the Earth that goes around the Sun, and that the Earth was not the centre of the universe. This was against the popular beliefs which have enjoyed acceptance since ancient times. The book was dedicated to Pope Paul III in a preface that argues mathematics, not physics, should be the basis for understanding and accepting this new theory. De Revolutionibus was divided into 6 books, sections or parts, followed closely the layout of Ptolemy's Almagest. Book 1 gives a general vision of the heliocentric theory and a summarized exposition of his cosmology. The heaven was spherical, as was the earth, and the land and water made a single globe. The celestial bodies, including the earth, had regular circular and everlasting movements. The earth rotated on its axis and around the sun. It also contained the answers to why the ancients thought the earth was central, and also the order of the planets around the sun and their periodicity. It also gives theorems for chord geometry as well as a table of chords. Book 2 described the principles of spherical astronomy as a basis for the arguments developed in the following books, and gave a comprehensive catalogue of the fixed stars. Book 3 described his work on the precession of the equinoxes and treated the apparent movements of the sun and related phenomena. Book 4 was a similar description of the moon and its orbital movements. Book 5 explained how to calculate the positions of the wandering stars based on the heliocentric model and gave tables of planets. Book 6 dealt with the digression in latitude due to the planets. Copernicus argued that the universe comprised of 8 spheres. The outermost consisted of motionless, fixed stars, with the Sun motionless at the centre. The known planets revolved around the Sun, each in its own sphere, in the order Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn. The Moon, however, revolved in its sphere around the Earth. What appeared to be the daily revolution of the Sun and fixed stars around the Earth was actually the Earth's daily rotation on its own axis. Copernicus adhered to one of the standard beliefs of his time, though, namely that the motions of celestial bodies must be composed of uniform circular motions. It is for this reason that he was unable to account for the observed apparent motion of the planets without retaining a complex system of epicycles similar to those of the Ptolemaic system. Despite Copernicus's adherence to this aspect of ancient astronomy, his radical shift from a geocentric to a heliocentric cosmology was a serious blow to Aristotle's science and helped usher in the scientific revolution. A manuscript of De Revolutionibus in Copernicus's own hand survived. After his death, it was given to his pupil Rheticus, who for publication had only been given a copy without annotations. Via Heidelberg, it ended up in Prague, where it was rediscovered and studied in the 19th century. In the meantime, another great work was on the verge of being published some 400 kilometers from Nuremberg at Basel, Switzerland. Here in the city of Basel, 29-year-old Vesalius was conducting a public dissection of the body of Jacob Karre von Gebweiler, a notorious felon from the city. Following the dissection, he then donates the skeleton to the University of Basel. This preparation, the Basel skeleton, will live on to become not only Vesalius's only well-preserved skeletal preparation, but also the world's oldest surviving anatomical preparation. It is still displayed at the Anatomical Museum of the University of Basel. In the same year, soon after, he goes on to publish the 7-volume De Humani Corporis Fabrica, on the fabric of the human body, with the help of Johannes Operinus. This becomes a groundbreaking work of human anatomy. The collection of books is based on his lectures, during which he deviated from the common practice of teaching from ancient scriptures by dissecting a corpse instead to illustrate what he was discussing. Vesalius's magnum opus presents a careful examination of the organs and the complete structure of the human body. This would not have been possible without the many advances that had been made during the Renaissance, including artistic developments in literal visual representation and the technical development of printing with refined woodcut engravings. Because of these developments and his careful immediate involvement, Vesalius was able to produce illustrations superior to any produced previously. He dedicated it to Charles V. At about the same time, he published an abridged edition for students, Andrea Vesali Suorum de Humani Corporis Fabrica Labororum Epitome, and dedicated it to Philip II of Spain, the son of the emperor. Though Vesalius's work was not the first such work based on actual dissection, nor even the first work of his era, but the production quality, highly detailed and intricate plates, and the likelihood that the artists who produced it were clearly present in person at the dissections made it an instant classic. Pirated editions were available almost immediately. The first book, The Bones and Cartilages, constitutes about a quarter of the entire collection. It presents Vesalius's observations on human bones and cartilages which he had collected from cemeteries. It covers the physical appearance of human bones and the differentiation of human bones and cartilage by function. In each chapter, Vesalius describes the bones in great detail, explaining their physical qualities in different ways. A major theme of this book is whether Garland described the bones of the human skeleton accurately, whose observations were actually based on animal dissections rather than humans. In the second book, The Ligaments and Muscles, Vesalius describes the structure of the muscles, the agents used in creating movement by the body, and the material used to hold the joints together. The order in which to dissect a human body to effectively observe each muscle in the body is laid out. Each illustration displays a deepening view of the human body which can be followed while dissecting a human body. Vesalius also mentions the instruments needed to perform a dissection. Here, Vesalius begins to describe how Garland's anatomical descriptions do not match his own observations. In order not to show disrespect to Garland, he suggests Garland's use of the anatomical structure is, in fact, correct, but not for humans. He even continues to describe some of the structures in the way Garland would. In the third and fourth books, Vesalius describes the veins, arteries, and nerves as vessels, but notes their differing physical structure. Veins and arteries contain a hollow channel, but nerves do not. Vesalius describes the route by which air travels through the lungs and the heart. He describes this process as a tree whose trunks divide into branches and twigs. He also describes how the body contains 4 veins: the portal vein, the venae cavae, the artery-like vein, now understood as the pulmonary vein, and the umbilical vein and 2 arteries, the aorta and the vein-like artery, now understood as the pulmonary artery. Vesalius says that these 4 veins and 2 arteries are the main vessels which branch out into smaller veins and arteries. Vesalius lists some 600 vessels in his tabulation of arteries, veins, and nerves. In the 5th book, The Organs of Nutrition and Generation, Vesalius gives detailed descriptions of the organs of nutrition, the urinary system, and the male and female reproductive systems. The alimentary and reproductive systems each make up about 40% of this book, and the description of the renal system and the correct technique for dissecting it makes up the remainder. The last 2 books of the collection, the 6th and 7th book, describes the structure and functions of the heart and the organs of respiration, the brain and its coverings, the eye, the organs of sensation, and the nerves of the limbs. A chapter is also devoted to the dissection of the eye. Vesalius describes the organs of the body in great detail by commenting on the variable strength of the attachment of the pleura to the thoracic walls, the strong attachment of the pericardium to the diaphragm, the shape and orientation of the ventricles of the heart, and the description of the semilunar valves. He concludes each of the 2 books with a chapter on the correct way to dissect the heart and the brain, respectively. The 7-book collection turned out to be a scientific masterpiece on anatomy like none other. Never was the complete human anatomy published in such great details, allowing De Humani Corporis Fabrica to also take its place amongst the greatest scientific volumes to ever have been written. Soon after publication, Vesalius was invited to become the imperial physician to the court of Emperor Charles V. Over the next 11 years, Vesalius travelled with the court, treating injuries caused in battle or tournaments, performing post-mortems, administering medication, and writing private letters addressing specific medical questions. In 1564, Vesalius went on a pilgrimage to the Holy Land, some said after being accused of dissecting a living body. He sailed with the Venetian fleet under James Malatesta via Cyprus. After struggling for many days with adverse winds in the Ionian Sea, he was shipwrecked on the island of Zakynthos. Here he soon died in such debt that a benefactor kindly paid for his funeral. At the time of his death, he was scarcely 50 years of age. He was then buried somewhere on the island of Corfu. (1632) Florence, Italy. Almost 90 years have passed since the publication of the last great scientific volume, and the divine clocks were at work again. It is about time for another breakthrough in science. This will be brought about by 68-year-old Galileo Galilei, who is currently preparing to pick one last fight with the Church. It has been just 17 years since Galileo's previous fight with the Church, when his writings on heliocentrism had been submitted to the Roman Inquisition by Father Niccolo Lorini, who claimed that Galileo and his followers were attempting to reinterpret the Bible. This was seen as a violation of the Council of Trent and looked dangerously like Protestantism. Galileo had gone to Rome to defend himself and his Copernican ideas. In February 1616, an inquisitorial commission declared heliocentrism to be foolish and absurd in philosophy and formally heretical, since it explicitly contradicts in many places the sense of Holy Scripture. The Inquisition found that the idea of the Earth's movement receives the same judgment in philosophy, and, in regard to theological truth, it is at least erroneous in faith. Pope Paul V instructed Cardinal Bellarmine to deliver this finding to Galileo and to order him to abandon the opinion that heliocentrism was physically true. On 26th of February, Galileo was called to Bellarmine's residence and ordered to abandon completely the opinion that the sun stands still at the centre of the world and the earth moves, and henceforth not to hold, teach, or defend it in any way whatsoever, either orally or in writing. The decree of the Congregation of the Index also banned Copernicus's De Revolutionibus and other heliocentric works until correction. However, the election of his friend as Pope Urban VIII about a decade ago gave him new strength. Galileo finally published his book, Dialogue Concerning the Two Chief World Systems. While writing the book, Galileo originally referred to it as his Dialogue on the Tides, and when the manuscript went to the Inquisition for approval, the title was Dialogue on the Ebb and Flow of the Sea. he was ordered to remove all mention of tides from the title and to change the preface, because granting approval to such a title would look like approval of his theory of the tides using the motion of the Earth as proof. The book is presented as a series of discussions over a span of 4 days among two philosophers, Salviati and Simplicio, and a layman, Sagredo. In day 1, Salviati, who is an embodiment of Galileo himself, tries to convince Simplicio, who, like the Church and the rest of the world, believe in Aristotle's geocentric view, that what is possible now was not possible at Aristotle's time. Like seeing the planets using the telescope, Salviati suggests that Aristotle used his experience to formulate his theory just as others do, and that he would change his mind in the present circumstances with all the new instruments available and the advances made in science. Salviati mentions about the sunspots, to which Simplicio argues that sunspots could simply be small, opaque objects passing in front of the sun. But Salviati points out that some appear or disappear randomly, and those at the edge are flattened, unlike separate bodies. Galileo writes, "It is better Aristotelian philosophy to say heaven is alterable because my senses tell me, than heaven is unalterable because Aristotle was so persuaded by reasoning." It concludes with Sagredo, the intelligent layman, who declares that he considers the earth noble because of the changes, to which Simplicio adds that changes in the moon or stars would be useless because they do not benefit man. Day 2 is all about proving that Earth's motion can be possible. Salviati answers popular arguments against the Earth's motion like, why don't we feel the effect? How come things fall vertically? Why don't we walk down a mountain instead of climbing it, etc. In day 3, Simplicio gives the greatest argument against the motion of the Earth, that if it moves, then it can no longer be the center of the zodiac, the world. Salviati points out that if anything is the center, it must be the Sun, not the Earth, because all the planets are closer or further away from the Earth at different times. Venus and Mars up to 8 times. He encourages Simplicio to imagine the planets, starting with Venus and Mercury, rotating about the Sun. Sagredo asks Salviati to explain how the Copernican system explains the seasons and inequalities of night and day. This he does with the aid of a diagram, showing the position of the Earth in the 4 seasons. He points out how much simpler it is than the Ptolemaic system. Simplicio is still unconvinced. Finally, in day 4, the explanation for the tide is given by using the motion of Earth as a tool. Although the book had its flaws, especially in the explanation of tides, but never before was so many arguments against the motion of Earth tackled in a single book. The incredible amount of first ever astronomical observations within the book that made it too much for the Church to defend the Ptolemaic system is what makes it earn its place alongside the other previous 2 entries in the quest for greatest scientific volumes to ever have been written. However, Galileo had to pay for his daring attempt. The Pope did not take the ridicule lightly, nor the Copernican advocacy. Galileo had lost his biggest and most powerful supporter, the Pope. In September 1632, he was called to Rome to defend his writing. He finally arrived in February 1633 and was brought before Inquisitor Vincenzo Maculani to be charged. On 22nd of June 1663, the sentence was delivered in 3 parts. 1. Galileo was found vehemently suspect of heresy, namely, of having held the opinions that the sun lies motionless at the centre of the universe, that the earth is not at its centre and moves, and that one may hold and defend an opinion as probable after it has been declared contrary to Holy Scripture. He was required to abjure, curse, and detest those opinions. 2. He was sentenced to formal imprisonment at the pleasure of the Inquisition. On the following day, this was commuted to house arrest, which he remained under for the rest of his life. 3. His offending dialogue was banned, and in an action not announced at the trial, publication of any of his works was forbidden, including any he might write in the future. Galileo was finally allowed to return to his villa at Arcetri near Florence in 1634, where he spent the remainder of his life under house arrest. A 1640s painting by the Spanish painter Bartolomé Esteban Murillo surfaced that depicts an imprisoned Galileo gazing at the wall of his dungeon, on which are written the words "Eppur si muove," and yet it moves. (1642), the same year in which Galileo dies of fever and heart palpitations, on Christmas Eve, an hour or two after midnight, at Woolsthorpe Manor in Woolsthorpe by Colsterworth, a hamlet in the county of Lincolnshire, the unanimously agreed author of the greatest scientific volume ever is born, Isaac Newton. In January 1684, Edmund Halley, Christopher Wren, and Robert Hooke have a conversation in which Hooke claims to not only have derived the inverse square law, but also all the laws of planetary motion. Wren unconvinced. Hooke did not produce the claimed derivation, although the others gave him time to do it, and Halley, who could derive the inverse square law for the restricted circular case by substituting Kepler's relation into Huygens' formula for centrifugal force, failed to derive the relation generally, resolved to ask Newton. Halley was at that time a fellow and council member of the Royal Society in London. When Halley asked Newton's opinion on the problem of planetary motions discussed earlier that year between Halley, Hooke and Wren, Newton surprised Halley by saying that he had already made the derivations some time ago, but that he could not find the papers. Halley then had to wait for Newton to find the results, but in November 1684, Newton sent Halley an amplified version of whatever previous work Newton had done on the subject. This took the form of a 9-page manuscript, De Mortem Corporum in Gyrum, of the motion of bodies in an orbit. The visit, however, served a much superior purpose. It seems to have provided Newton with the incentive and spur to develop and write what became Philosophiae Naturalis Principia Mathematica, Mathematical Principles of Natural Philosophy. Principia is a work in 3 books. In the preface of the Principia, Newton writes, "Rational mechanics will be the science of motions resulting from any forces whatsoever, and of the forces required to produce any motions, accurately proposed and demonstrated. And therefore we offer this work as mathematical principles of philosophy. For all the difficulty of philosophy seems to consist in this: from the phenomena of motions to investigate the forces of nature, and then from these forces to demonstrate the other phenomena." Book 1, subtitled De Mortem Corporum, on the motion of bodies, concerns with motion in the absence of any resisting medium. It establishes relationships between centripetal forces and the laws of areas now known as Kepler's second law. It relates circular velocity and radius of path curvature to radial force and relationships between centripetal forces varying as the inverse square of the distance to the centre and orbits of conic section form. Here, Newton takes the first step in the definition and study of the problem of the movements of three massive bodies subject to their mutually perturbing gravitational attractions, a problem which later gained name and fame, among other reasons for its great difficulty, as the three-body problem. He also establishes the law of attractive forces of spherical bodies. Newton proves that a massive, spherically symmetrical body attracts other bodies outside itself as if all its mass were concentrated at its centre. This fundamental result, called the shell theorem, enables the inverse square law of gravitation to be applied to the real solar system to a very close degree of approximation. Book 2, subtitled Liber Secundus, largely concerns motion through resisting mediums. Just as Newton examined consequences of different conceivable laws of attraction in Book 1, here he examines different conceivable laws of resistance. He discusses resistance in direct proportion to velocity and goes on to examine the implications of resistance in proportion to the square of velocity. He further discusses hydrostatics, properties of compressible fluids, and the effects of air resistance on pendulums. He compares the resistance offered by a medium against motions of globes with different properties. He derives rules to determine the speed of waves in fluids and relates them to the density. It is said that Book 2 was largely written on purpose to refute a theory of Descartes which had some wide acceptance. According to this Cartesian theory of vortices, planetary motions were produced by the whirling of fluid vortices that filled interplanetary space and carried the planets along with them. Newton wrote at the end of Book 2 his conclusion that the hypothesis of vortices was completely at odds with the astronomical phenomena and served not so much to explain as to confuse it. Book 3, subtitled De Mundi Systemate, on the system of the world, is an exposition of many consequences of universal gravitation, especially its consequences for astronomy. It builds upon the propositions of the previous books and applies them with further specificity to the motions observed in the solar system. Newton lists the astronomical observation on which he relies and establishes in a stepwise manner that the inverse square law of mutual gravitation applies to solar system bodies, starting with the satellites of Jupiter and going on by stages to show that the law is of universal application. He also gives the theory of the motions of comets and accounts for the tides, attempting quantitative estimates of the contributions of the Sun and Moon to the tidal motions, and offers the first theory of the precession of the equinoxes. Book 3 also considers the harmonic oscillator in 3 dimensions. In Book 3, Newton also makes clear his heliocentric view of the solar system, modified in a somewhat modern way, since already in the mid-1680s he recognized the deviation of the Sun from the centre of gravity of the solar system. For Newton, the common centre of gravity of the Earth, the Sun, and all the planets is to be esteemed the centre of the world, and that this centre either is at rest or moves uniformly forward. Principia also contained underlying principles of calculus, which Newton fed to the public without introducing them directly to its groundbreaking realms. The French mathematical physicist Alexis Clairaut assessed it in 1747. The famous book of Mathematical Principles of Natural Philosophy marked the epoch of a great revolution in physics. The method followed by its illustrious author, Sir Newton, spread the light of mathematics on a science which up to then had remained in the darkness of conjectures and hypotheses. A more recent assessment has been that while acceptance of Newton's theories was not immediate, by the end of a century after publication in 1687, no one could deny that, out of the Principia, a science had emerged that, at least in certain respects, so far exceeded anything that had ever gone before that it stood alone as the ultimate exemplar of science. 1777. Paris, France. Something monumental is going to happen again. A paper is going to be published on the true theory of combustion. Humans have been roaming the earth for 200,000 years and have been ever dependent on the phenomenon of combustion for food, for heat, and for almost all aspects of daily life. Yet, up until now, no one had come forth with the correct theory of combustion. But all that is going to change now by a French nobleman and a chemist, Antoine Laurent de Lavoisier. He publishes Réflexions sur le phlogistique, Reflections on Phlogiston. The paper was a full-scale attack on the then current phlogiston theory of combustion. The phlogiston was, according to Stahl, the substance released by any solid under the action of fire, which explained the loss of mass undergone by a body after combustion. However, Lavoisier demonstrated with sulfur, lead and tin that the residual mass of one of the bodies after calcination was higher than the initial, which invalidated the theory of phlogiston. In fact, the weight of the phlogiston would have had to be negative in the case of metals, which makes no sense. He successfully theorized the role of oxygen in combustion, perhaps the most important phenomena alongside breathing, without which humans would have been long perished or won't be the way they are now. The demonstration opened the way for the chemical revolution. Being the one who named hydrogen and oxygen, who identified sulfur as an element rather than a compound, who wrote the first ever textbook of chemistry, and who reformed modern chemistry single-handedly, his greatest work still remains, Réflexions sur le phlogistique. The fact that for 200,000 years no one got it right but Lavoisier did is what makes this paper earn its way to our list. For the author of such a legendary volume, and the man who will be known as the father of modern chemistry, the ending couldn't be more saddening. As the French Revolution gained momentum, on the 24th November 1793, during the Reign of Terror, the arrest of all the former tax gatherers was ordered. Lavoisier was one of them. He was wrongfully branded as a traitor by the Convention under Maximilien de Robespierre. On 8th of May 1794 in Paris, at the age of 50, Along with his 27 co-defendants, Lavoisier was tried, convicted, and beheaded. His importance to science was expressed by Joseph Louis Lagrange, who lamented the beheading by saying, "Il ne leur a fallu qu'un moment pour faire tomber cette tête, et 100 années peut-être ne suffiront pas pour en reproduire une semblable." It only took them an instant to cut off his head, and 100 years might not suffice to reproduce its like. (1856). Slightly more than 60 years have passed since the death of Lavoisier, and works on a scientific volume which will go on to rival the fame of Newton's Principia is in the making. Charles Robert Darwin is investigating whether eggs and seeds could survive travel across seawater to spread species across oceans. Charles Lyell, a friend of Darwin, reads a paper by Alfred Russel Wallace titled "On the Law Which Has Regulated the Introduction of New Species." Being already aware of what Darwin has been working on for all these years, he saw similarities with Darwin's thoughts and urged him to publish in order to establish precedents. And so it all began, with Darwin writing a short paper. He expanded his plans to a big book on species titled Natural Selection. By June 1858, his family was in crisis, with children in the village dying of scarlet fever. He put matters in the hands of his friends. On the evening of 28th of June, Darwin's son dies of scarlet fever after almost a week of severe illness. On 24th of November 1859, Darwin publishes his legendary book On the Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection, or the Preservation of Favoured Races in the Struggle for Life. The book proves to be unexpectedly popular, with the entire stock of 1,250 copies oversubscribed when it went on sale to booksellers on November 1859 itself. In his book, he writes, "Light will be thrown on the origin of man and his history. As many more individuals of each species are born than can possibly survive, and as, consequently, there is a frequently recurring struggle for existence, it follows that any being, if it varies however slightly in any manner profitable to itself, under the complex and sometimes varying conditions of life, will have a better chance of surviving, and thus be naturally selected. From the strong principle of inheritance, any selected variety will tend to propagate its new and modified form." At the end of the book, he concludes that there is grandeur in this view of life, with its several powers, having been originally breathed into a few forms or into one, and that, whilst this planet has gone cycling on according to the fixed law of gravity, from so simple a beginning, endless forms most beautiful and most wonderful have been and are being evolved. This book proves to be a milestone in the history of evolution, summarizing some of the fundamental facts of evolution. Every species is fertile enough that if all offspring survived to reproduce, the population would grow. Despite periodic fluctuations, populations remain roughly the same. Resources such as food are limited and are relatively stable over time. A struggle for survival ensues. Individuals in a population vary significantly from one another. Much of this variation is heritable. Individuals less suited to the environment are less likely to survive and less likely to reproduce. Individuals more suited to the environment are more likely to survive and more likely to reproduce and leave their heritable traits to future generations, which produces the process of natural selection. This slowly effective process results in populations changing to adapt to their environments, and ultimately these variations accumulate over time to form new species. Inference. The book aroused international interest while drawing a fair share of criticism initially. The most famous confrontation was at the public 1860 Oxford evolution debate during a meeting of the British Association for the Advancement of Science, where the Bishop of Oxford, Samuel Wilberforce, though not opposed to transmutation of species, argued against Darwin's explanation and human descent from apes. Joseph Hooker argued strongly for Darwin, and Thomas Huxley's legendary retort that he would rather be descended from an ape than a man who misused his gifts came to symbolize a triumph of science over religion. Darwin's meticulous research for decades and his groundbreaking theory, which finally explained the act of creation, cemented his book's position in every list of greatest scientific volumes ever, till now and for eternity. His book brought him Britain's highest scientific honour, the Royal Society's Copley Medal, which was awarded to him on 3rd of November 1864. He died on 19th of April 1882. His last words were to his family, telling his wife Emma, "I am not the least afraid of death. Remember what a good wife you have been to me. Tell all my children to remember how good they have been to me." Then, while she rested, he repeatedly told Henrietta and Francis, "It's almost worthwhile to be sick, to be nursed by you." He had expected to be buried in St. Mary's churchyard at Down, but at the request of Darwin's colleagues and after public and parliamentary petitioning, William Spottiswoode, President of the Royal Society, arranged for Darwin to be honoured by burial in Westminster Abbey, close to John Herschel and Isaac Newton. The funeral was held on Wednesday 26th of April and was attended by thousands of people, including family, friends, scientists, philosophers and dignitaries. March 1879, 3 years before the death of Darwin, yet another extraordinary genius is born. Born to Hermann and Pauline in Ulm, Württemberg, Germany, is a baby boy whom they name Albert Einstein. Einstein grows up to be quite a flamboyant character, falling in love with the house owner, the professor's daughter, marrying a classmate from his mathematics and physics teaching diploma program at the Zurich Polytechnic, and maintaining a love affair with his cousin. In professional life, though, he was far from being successful. After graduating in 1900, Einstein spent almost 2 frustrating years searching for a teaching post. He acquired Swiss citizenship in February 1901, but was not conscripted for medical reasons. With the help of his friend, Marcel Grossmann's father, he secured a job in Bern at the Federal Office for Intellectual Property, the Patent Office, as an assistant examiner, level 3. Einstein was still honing himself with his thought experiments, but everything is going to change soon. 1905, the Annus Mirabilis, or the Year of Miracles. Einstein shocks the world, as well as the foundation of physics itself, with 4 groundbreaking papers. Paper 1 on photoelectric effect, titled On a Heuristic Viewpoint Concerning the Production and Transformation of Light. Paper 2 on Brownian motion, titled On the Motion of Small Particles Suspended in a Stationary Liquid as Required by the Molecular Kinetic Theory of Heat. Paper 3 on Special Relativity, titled On the Electrodynamics of Moving Bodies. And Paper 4 on Matter-Energy Equivalence. Does the inertia of a body depend upon its energy content? Despite the monumental importance of these papers, the one that secured its place in the list is a 5th paper, which he publishes in 1915, titled The Field Equations of Gravitation. In this paper, he gives the world his magnum opus theory, the theory of general relativity. It dethrones Newtonian theory of gravity as the theory that governs the universe at large scale. According to general relativity, the observed gravitational attraction between masses results from the warping of space and time by those masses. It also inferred that given a gravitational field strong enough, even light could be bent. It was as radical an idea as it can get, and the world was in no way going to just accept it. In 1916, Einstein further used general relativity to predict gravitational waves, ripples in the curvature of space-time which propagate as waves, travelling outward from the source, transporting energy as gravitational radiation. Yet another mind-bending proposition which had no place in the Newtonian theory of gravity. The existence of gravitational waves was possible under general relativity due to its Lorentz invariance, which brings the concept of a finite speed of propagation of the physical interactions of gravity with it. By contrast, gravitational waves cannot exist in the Newtonian theory of gravitation, which postulates that the physical interactions of gravity propagate at infinite speed. The bending of light was confirmed by Sir Arthur Eddington during the solar eclipse of the 29th of May 1919. On the 7th of November the same year, leading British newspaper The Times printed a banner headline that read, "Revolution in Science, New Theory of the Universe, Newtonian Ideas Overthrown." Unlike the bending of light, his prediction of gravitational waves took a lot more time to be verified. The first indirect detection of gravitational waves came in the 1970s through observation of a pair of closely orbiting neutron stars, PSR B1913+16. The explanation of the decay in their orbital period was that they were emitting gravitational waves. However, it was only confirmed as recently as the 11th of February 2016 when researchers at LIGO published the first observation of gravitational waves exactly 100 years after the prediction. Einstein once said the reason for the development of general relativity was that the preference of inertial motions within special relativity was unsatisfactory, while a theory which from the outset prefers no state of motion, even accelerated ones, should appear more satisfactory. His theory became more than satisfactory, though, developing into an essential tool in modern astrophysics. It provides the foundation for the current understanding of black holes, regions of space where gravitational attraction is so strong that not even light can escape. In a sense, his theory really did what he desired, to see the world through the eyes of God. On the 17th of April 1955, Einstein experienced internal bleeding caused by the rupture of an abdominal aortic aneurysm. He took the draft of a speech he was preparing for a television appearance commemorating the State of Israel's 7th anniversary with him to the hospital, but couldn't complete it. Einstein refused surgery, saying, "I want to go when I want. It is tasteless to prolong life artificially. I have done my share. It is time to go. I will do it elegantly." He died in Princeton Hospital early the next morning at the age of 76, having continued to work until near the end. During the autopsy, the pathologists of Princeton Hospital, Thomas Stoltz Harvey, removed Einstein's brain for preservation without the permission of his family, in the hope that the neuroscience of the future will be able to discover what made Einstein so intelligent. In a memorial lecture delivered on December 13, 1965 at UNESCO headquarters, nuclear physicist Robert Oppenheimer summarized his impression of Einstein as a person. He was almost wholly without sophistication and wholly without worldliness. There was always with him a wonderful purity, at once childlike and profoundly stubborn. 1948, almost a decade before the death of Einstein, while physicists were unravelling the mysteries of the universe left and right, it was the biologists who were playing the catch-up. After revolutionary breakthroughs in physics, we now knew more about how the things around us work rather than the things inside us. It was eminent that breakthrough in biology was long pending. James Dewey Watson begins his PhD research in Luria's laboratory at Indiana University. According to the conventional view of the time, DNA was widely considered to be a stupid tetranucleotide, serving only a structural role to support proteins. However, even at this early time, Watson, under the influence of the Phage group, a distributed group of researchers, was aware of the Avery, Macleod, Mccarty experiment, which suggested that DNA was much more than that. It was a genetic molecule. In the same year, at the Cold Spring Harbor Phage laboratory, he used radioactive phosphate as a tracer to determine which molecular components of phage particles actually infected the target bacteria during viral infection. The intention was to determine whether protein or DNA was the genetic material, but upon consultation with Max Delbruck, he determined that the results were inconclusive and could not specifically identify the newly labelled molecules as DNA. However, it made Watson certain that DNA had a definite molecular structure that could be elucidated. In mid-March 1953, using experimental data collected mainly by Rosalind Franklin and also by Maurice Wilkins, Watson and Crick deduces the double helix structure of DNA. Franklin plays an immense role in the discovery, her experimental research providing estimates of the water content of DNA crystals which were consistent with the two sugar phosphate backbones being on the outside of the molecule. Franklin personally told Crick and Watson that the backbone had to be on the outside, which was a crucial piece of information because before that, Pauling, Watson and Crick had generated erroneous models with the chains inside and the bases pointing outwards. Her identification of the space group for DNA crystals revealed to Crick that the two DNA strands were antiparallel. Sir Lawrence Bragg, the director of the Cavendish Laboratory, makes the original announcement of the discovery at a Solvay conference on proteins in Belgium, April 8, 1953, but it goes unnoticed and unreported by the press, keeping the rest of the world from understanding the monumental breakthrough that has just been achieved. Each of the scientists then publishes their own unique contributions to the discovery of the structure of DNA in separate articles, and all of the contributors publish their findings in the same volume of the same scientific journal, Nature. These classic molecular biology papers are identified as Watson J.D. and Crick FHC, a structure for deoxyribose nucleic acid, Wilkins MHF, Stokes AR and Wilson HR, molecular structure of deoxypentose nucleic acids, Franklin R and Gosling RG, molecular configuration in sodium thymonucleate. In the paper, they suggest for the first time the now famous double helix structure of DNA, the fundamental genetic block that is responsible for everything that makes a person who he or she is. Richie Calder, in the London newspaper News Chronicle on May 15th of the same year, covers the breakthrough in an article entitled "Why You Are You, Near a Secret of Life." Franklin dies in 1958. The rest of them, Watson, Crick and Wilkins, gets awarded the 1962 Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine for their research on the structure of nucleic acids. Since Darwin in 1859, it was the first great breakthrough in the field of biology, the first big step since the past century that humans took towards understanding themselves, of which, together, the three papers of these revolutionary scientists under the collective name The Structure of DNA rightfully earns its place among the greatest scientific volumes to have ever been written. It has been more than half a century now, and the divine clock is starting to ring its bells again. It is only a matter of time before yet again the world of science gets the next entry in the lists of the greatest.